Yeah, I think you can have the main character be the antagonist.
Do you think that's the case in this film?
I don't I don't know.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our two co-hosts, Avalon and Andrew, to review the third in the Marvel series for the Avengers. That's right, we're talking about Marvel's Avengers Infinity War. The screenplay for this film was by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, and it was directed by the Russo brothers, Anthony and Joe Russo. So, getting into those overall thoughts, I just thought I'd throw those out to you to start today. We're talking about a film that has been known in the annals of history when it first came out as, oh my goodness, this is such a twister for the Marvel Universe. Everyone coming together, so many characters, such great action, a menacing villain. Walking out of that theater, I remember that first time going like, oh my gosh, this film is amazing. And looking back at it today, I actually was a little disappointed, not gonna lie. There was a little bit of this that came to me and went, I really don't know if this movie stands on its own. And there is so much that built up to where we are today that it stood in its time. But I don't know that if you watch this film by itself, or even with the preceding Avengers films, it would be an impactful movie. And so I think it says a lot about the MCU, how much it built up. But I'm going to definitely take the stance today that it doesn't stand up to quite the length that it did when it first shone on the big screen for the first time. I also think there's an interesting way you can take this film in regards to what is driving it and making it compelling, which in some ways makes you recharacterize how you view this film as a whole. So we'll get into that pretty early on, I'm sure. But before we get into too many details on that, I want to get other people's thoughts. So Avalon, what was your initial impression and rating for this film? My initial rating came out to be, despite all of those critiques, a 6.9. Right. What was your thoughts, Avalon?
I had three thoughts majorly about this movie. First, this movie might be Peter Dinklage probably plays the biggest character he's played in any movie he's ever played in this movie. And that's saying something. Second thing is this movie only works as a between sections, like a intermediate chapter, more or less. It doesn't work on its own. It only works if you take it as a point between all the movies that came before and the movie that comes after. And even then, it's but if you take it on its own, there's a lot of things left to be desired. There's a lot of problems this movie has, and honestly, it's not really all that enjoyable when you begin to realize how much is lacking in this story. I actually, and I remember watching this in theaters the first time around, and I, being the Marvel nerd that I was like, oh my word, loving it. But now it's just dude, there are some good things in this movie that I still like, but overall, there's a reason my score is a 3.75.
Wow, that's pretty low. So there you go. Andrew, I'm sure you have some spicy takes. What are your thoughts on Avengers Infinity War?
I think this is a good movie, and my review reflects that. I gave it an 8.5.
Here we go.
This is going to be good.
We're just going to run back the last episode with Age of Ultron, just watch that, and then you pretty much got your reviews of this one. We're good. See y'all next week.
I'm just saying this for you, Sean. I am taking your role in this podcast. This is Star Wars Episode 8 all over again, except this is so much better than Star Wars Episode 8.
We shall see. If you're interested, keep listening because we will get to those points for sure. But if you're not familiar with Avengers Infinity War, of course, we want to give you that background. So, Avalon, you want to give everyone a summary of what Avengers Infinity War is all about.
So Infinity War is the culmination of a decade of Marvel storytelling and stories coming together. Literally, all the events of the prior two Avengers movies, and it was kind of hinted at Age of Ultron. We are introduced to the major villain behind all of it, Thanos, and we're shown him essentially uh, attacking and defeating an Asgardian ship where Thor is at with Loki and the Asgardians. Hulk is also on board, and Hulk is teleported to Earth to warn them of what's about to happen, which starts a chain of events of the Avengers and other characters frantically trying to get resources together and trying to get some sort of defense up to stop Thanos before he arrives, to stop him from getting all 6 Infinity Stones. And so the question, of course, is can they defeat Thanos? Can they stop him before he completes the gauntlet?
Yeah. With his ability to wipe out half the population, as is his goal. Yeah, it's definitely a thing they built up all of this time. And if you're any fan of the MCU or even just a fan of the comics in general, you saw where this was coming. You were excited to see what happened. And, this was one of the few comic series. I'm not a huge Marvel nerd, but of the 3 series that I ever read, this was one of them, and there was good reason for it because there was so much going on, and they did some interesting takes from separate from the comics that I still appreciated. So it wasn't like I was getting hung up on that in a fan sense, but in regards to the storyline itself, I think they have some interesting things going on. So let's start off with that opening scene, as we always do. That's where they first try to get you gripped and engaged in the plot that we see showing for us today. You see that it comes right off the edge of Thor Ragnarok, where the entire ship of refugees is fleeing from Asgard after it has been destroyed, and you see that it gets attacked by Thanos' ship, and he just obliterates everyone and proceeds to take the stone from the Tesseract, which was belonging to Loki at the time. What are your guys' thoughts on the introduction of Thanos, this introductory scene? Go ahead, Andrew. Give us your initial thoughts.
Let me pull up my thoughts, because I realize this podcast is going to be me fighting you guys this entire time. So I need to make sure I have these well thought out. Okay, I think the opener's great. It takes us from everything that we've had leading up to this, and it throws us right into the action. We see the characters of Thor, Loki, and Heimdall immediately in the aftermath of Thor Ragnarok. You have the conclusion of Loki's arc, at least this iteration of him in this scene, immediately dying, immediately setting up the stakes that is Thanos. You have Hulk getting the crap beat out of him, which, even though some may not like that in terms of Hulk's power scaling, I think for the sake of the story that you're going for and setting up Thanos as a formidable threat, having him just 1v1 the Hulk, mano-a-mano, without any of the stones, immediately sets him up as a pretty formidable threat. Also, considering the fact that he just took out all that was left of Asgard with a Thor who was recently awakened during Ragnarok, and Loki and Heimdall, it just opens the scene with this devastation, and then you have this almost god complex, which I must say, not really sure what it is with Marvel and their Avengers villains having a god complex, but it works. I'm not, as a Christian, I'm not sure how I feel about him literally using the line that he says, "I am." That feels like that's a little interesting there, but other than that, I think the opener is, I think it's really solid for getting us right into the film and picking up right where we left off.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. Avalon, what are your thoughts?
So while the opener did not get full points for me, it did get pretty high points. I think in terms of openers, this is a good opener to start a movie off. I mean, we start with the villains having essentially they've beaten the Asgardians. We come to this devastation and death and destruction of their ship, and you see Thor beaten within an inch of his life. We haven't seen the fight, I mean, but you clearly see he's been beaten to a point where he can't fight anymore, and he's being threatened for the Tesseract. And then of course you see Andrew just mentioned, the fight with Hulk and Thanos, which I also love because I think that's a great, like, considering what we know about the Hulk and who he is, this is a great way of establishing the danger level of Thanos, where it's like, oh, he can defeat this unstoppable rage machine and like put him in its place. Like, that's no small feat. None of the other villains in any of the other movies has really done that. So, I mean, this does a lot of things right in terms of openers. The only gripe I have with this as an opener is that since it immediately throws you into the action, there is no like explanation of setup or anything like that. It assumes you have watched everything before this point. I mean, which makes sense. This is a sequel, but in terms of storytelling, in terms of like telling a story, I like, okay, well, you do have to acknowledge that you have to have seen everything before this to understand what is happening here and now. If you're a new person to the MCU, you can't start watching this. You will be completely lost on this opening scene. So, which I felt like is something that had to be acknowledged. It does have high points, but it's like, okay, let's be frank here. You can't just jump into this if you're a new person.
Right.
Not that you'd want to start here, but just felt like that needed to be said.
Yeah, and for a lot of the Marvel content that has come out at this point, right? You're talking about a story that is definitely heavily relying on this previous films, which we acknowledged at the beginning, and it's definitely bleeding into this one. You sometimes do have these in the middle of the action openers, right? And they will be fine because they end up explaining what went on later on in the film, and so it catches you up to that moment. In this case, it's more so they don't do that because they expect that you have all that background that you need to get where you are. And they cover so much ground in this one, too, that if they were to try to go back and explain that, this film would be 4 hours long instead of 3, which 3 is already a long film.
Yeah. And maybe, and just to be frank, like, I'm also probably being a little bit more critical of this opener in that light, because this is a regular thing Marvel has done in the past, where it's like they expect you to have watched a bunch of stuff before you watch this, which I don't appreciate necessarily. I think you should be telling some fairly self-contained stories set inside of a universe and setting. I don't like having to play catch up or having to do homework to watch something else to watch this. So so I'm being a little bit more critical on that point because of that light.
Sure. And I definitely think that it's worthy to have maybe a fuller discussion on that. In regards to just the opener, though, I myself thought it was very compelling. It's a fresh take from what we've normally got with the MCU, where they simply have a reestablishment of the hero's powers and this big fight, where maybe they have some questioning at best of what's going to happen and some foreboding, but overall it's just showing how awesome these characters are in their new form as they've reestablished themselves as these awesome characters, right? In this case, it just starts off right off the bat with this utter destruction that you see, that Thanos is this formidable force that they're going to face, and they have a serious problem to deal with. And the fact that they take Hulk, which is basically this giant ace card the Avengers has used consistently throughout the movies, to just throw in at the end and say, oh, look, now we have the Hulk. You can't kill the Hulk. He's going to beat your enemies to a pulp, and he's like this massive, unstoppable tank. The fact that he can be stopped from the start shows that this is a very serious issue that they're going to all have to band together to stop. So definitely, I think that the stakes were appropriately raised for the level of threat they were dealing with, and it was done fairly well. So as much as I'm not generally a fan with how they use the Incredible Hulk in these films, at least the technique of using him as this ultimate weapon that actually can be stopped in this case was a good technique. But anyways, let's talk about the character that we all are looking at in this film consistently throughout this time. We're going to start with the villain this time. What are you guys' thoughts on Thanos? Avalon, please go ahead.
This is the other part of the movie that I gave it full points on, because, I mean, I think Thanos is a great villain. If you're going to talk about him in the context of the story as a villain, he works perfectly. He has motive. He has a goal. He has some people he cares about, but he also has this sense of morality, which is clearly off, which you clearly see as wrong. And it's like, so you understand him, but you also don't agree with him and don't like what he's doing. So it's easy to root for him against him as the villain. You see him clearly as the antagonist of the story. And he clearly is supposed to represent death in terms of themes and storytelling. Like there's just so much like in terms of symbolism. There's like several things of symbolism regarding his characters. Like, okay, he's supposed to be this like harbinger of death in this story. So I gave him full points. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that one of the reasons that I started off with him as the topic to discuss at the beginning is because from the very onset of this film, he sets the stage for what the story is going to be about in his little monologue. Now, granted, I think his monologue gets a little cheesy at the end, so it gets a little passed over compared to other opener lines that you get from villains, and I think that maybe his lines aren't as pithy or quotable or as thought-provoking as, say, Ultron's, as we discussed in the last episode. But in this one, he starts off, one of his first lines is, he says, "I know what it's like to lose, to feel so desperately that you're right, yet to fail nonetheless." And then he says a couple more things and says, "Destiny arrives all the same, and now it's here." And then he says, or should I say, "I am," right? And that's where it goes a little like, all right, now you're just trying to be too epic, in my opinion. That's where the whole thing gets thrown in the trash. But the first part is very pivotal because it's talking about this idea of like, you are giving everything you've got to fight for this goal, to fight for these achievements, to fight for something you truly believe in. And how much are you willing to give to make that happen? And yet at the end of that, are you still able to succeed? And that's like the big question throughout this entire film, and the big fight that everyone goes through. As you see consistently, people are being forced to go to the very edge of what they're willing to give to achieve the goal of stopping Thanos. And at the end of the day, a lot of them still fail. And we'll get into the details of each of those, but you're going to be talking about Peter Quill, you're going to be talking about Doctor Strange, you're going to be talking about Gamora, you're going to be talking about himself, you're going to be talking about a bunch of characters who all have to go through this to try to achieve and see, will they achieve their goals even if they're willing to sacrifice everything to achieve something that they believe in. So he's incredible. Like, not only is he a formidable, dangerous enemy, but he also has so much packed into who he is, why he's doing it, and this fundamental belief that no matter what he's doing it for the right reasons, and how far he's willing to go to achieve that. So just incredible, and we'll get into it more, but I want to pause right there.
You just reminded me of my third thing at the beginning. I was going to say at the beginning of the podcast. My third thing was about that. Just the monologuing of Thanos throughout this movie. Like, I just kept thinking of the Incredibles quote, "You caught me monologuing." And this just happens at both this movie and Endgame. I know it happens in Endgame because it's just like, why are you waiting for him to finish what he's saying sometimes?
Yeah, sometimes it's more appropriate. It makes more sense with, say, Doctor Strange
there are
later on in the film, but other times, yeah, it's kind of like, why are you saying that? It's like, not. It doesn't feel as appropriate for him as it does for Ultron. But Andrew, go ahead. What are your thoughts?
I'm still making sure I have responses to other things you guys have said. I mean, I've been paying attention though. I agree with most of what you said about Thanos. I do think the monologuing is actually, I appreciated it for Thanos. Thanos is this super narcissistic character who believes he can do no wrong. He's been planning this for like decades. He's been slowly plotting. He's been using Loki and finding out where the stones are. He's literally weaponized children and made them into living weapons is the word I'm looking for, which is what you get with Gamora and Nebula. And so his monologuing is more of just, he's just relishing the moment because it's finally here. And he's like, this is what my entire life has been leading towards. And like, he sees himself as God. If you see yourself as an entity equivalent to what the most powerful being in the universe, then why wouldn't you monologue to these weaker creatures? You aren't afraid of them in any way. You might as well get some sort of dopamine boost out of just telling them your maniacal plans. Sure, like thematically having Ultron monologue is like, I would argue more satisfying, but that's because I appreciate Ultron more than I probably appreciate Thanos as a villain. That doesn't necessarily make the movies better or worse, in my opinion. But I don't really have a problem with the monologuing. And other than that, I mean, I pretty much agree with what you guys have said so far. So,
well, I mean, honestly, Thanos is awesome. We all agree with that. Wow, we've only agreed so far, and yet we have a 3.9 or whatever Avalon gave and 8.5. So there's still a disparity here. I'm sure we're going to get into it with the other characters, so let's jump right into that. Who is the primary character or characters in this film? Let's start with Andrew.
Primary Iron Man. Primary characters Iron Man and Thor. Which I appreciate it because Thor has not gotten enough love in the previous Avengers movies. He's kind of just been the stoic Asgardian god who shows up, beats the crap out of people, and then leaves. Literally how the last two movies went for him. And he's got like these minor subplots. I think Thor is great in this movie. You actually get to see him struggling, and he has flaws in these massive motivators for him, literally stripping him of... In the previous movie, he lost his hammer, and then he lost his planet. In this movie, he loses his best friend. He loses his brother, who he assumes is dead for real. He loses his entire race, as far as we know at this point, because the ship he's on gets absolutely decimated. He's all alone. He is the last son of Asgard in his mind. And you have that conversation with Rocket Raccoon where he's like, all these things, it's great for clearing the mind. Solid. It drives him so far that he's willing to risk his own life in order to get this hammer because in his mind, he's too weak to take Thanos on his own. And then in the end, it still isn't enough to stop the impending doom. Arguably, he is the one who kills him. He drives the hammer into his chest, but it doesn't stop the death of half the people in the universe. So that's Thor. Iron Man. I mean, I'm sure you guys have plenty of thoughts on Iron Man. I think this is just the accumulation of Iron Man's arc, the absolute insane levels of fear that he feels for Thanos have been building up since the first Avengers movie. You have the Chitauri army. When you get like a glimpse of Thanos' power, you've got Ultron, you've got Loki. In Age of Ultron, he gets the vision from Wanda. You have his fears about losing Spider-Man, which are set up really well in Spider-Man Homecoming and are done pretty well even in this film on its own with just building their relationship as this mentor-mentee dynamic. And then losing Spider-Man and then losing to Thanos is like, it's great. So.
Nice. Alba, do you have thoughts on those two characters or additional characters you think are more relevant as the primary protagonists of this film?
You know, I was actually waiting because I was curious who, after our discussion last time, actually the last two podcasts, who Andrew was going to say is the main character. So I'm a little surprised he says Thor, but I guess it makes sense. But honestly, I was just looking at this movie, the stories and everything, and I'm not convinced that Thor and Tony Stark are the main characters of the story because so much screen time is given to some other characters. Gamora, Bruce Banner, Wanda, Vision, Steve Rogers even has some significant, felt like significant screen time and everything. In fact, I even just like Googled screen time. Iron Man has like less than 20 minutes of screen time in this movie. And so I'm just like, I don't know. I have a hard time saying any of them were the central characters or that you can even get behind like a specific character because there's so many like tangents and side plots going on between the different characters that I like just watching it. It was kind of at moments like too much for me. I felt like there's just so many characters you're trying to follow. And like they each have their own like goals, motives, and like going all these different directions all at once. I mean, it makes sense what they're trying to do. They're trying to stop Thanos overall, but it's not all like they're not all doing the same thing. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's definitely emotional stakes more so for Tony Stark than some of the other characters, right? Which is why even though he might have less screen time, you can make the case that he has more development as a character in a primary role than some of the other characters there. And that goes back to the dreams he's been having, right? Where he's been afraid of Thanos since the beginning. And then you also have this idea of Spider-Man for sure, which I think the Spider-Man area, if you really want to make the case for that, you do rely very heavily on the previous films for that, because the fact of the matter is most of that is developed in the previous films. In this one, he shows up and he hides away on the ship as they're escaping from Earth to try to save Doctor Strange, right? And then Tony Stark's like, "What the heck? You shouldn't be here. I can't protect you here." Blah blah blah. And sure, he feels some obligation and expectation to take care of him, but at the end of the day, it's pretty minimal, the explanation around that. And so, unless you have that previous background with him, I don't know that it carries a ton of weight, especially because, like you said, there's a ton of screen time given to it. And so, the emotional weight is pretty much like, I'm your mentor figure. Crap, now I have to take care of you too. Be a good little boy and don't get killed, right? And then at the end, he ends up dying in the snap of the fingers of Thanos, right? As always, there's spoilers in this review, so if you weren't expecting that, sorry, we just blew apart the whole case for you there. Everyone, or half the people die in this film, so there you go. But, in regards to Tony Stark and his character, sure, they develop it, and he's more developed than a lot of the characters there. So I would say in regards to seeing him as a primary character and seeing his growth in this film, it's definitely there. And it's even more so there in the next film. So he's not irrelevant to the plot and how they develop him, but I wouldn't say that he's the most compelling aspect of this film. In regards to Thor, I still don't think he's very compelling in this film, to be perfectly honest. I think the initial aspect of his loss, the only way you can take him as a compelling character is if he is just this character wrought with this pure desire for revenge. And this is really a revenge story for Thor more than anything else, where he is there to get Thanos and punish him for all the things he's taken from him. And it's not really explored a ton other than him basically saying, I want to kill Thanos and I have a reason to kill Thanos. Sure, it's there and he just says that. It's a little out of character for Thor, so it would have been nice to see that developed more rather than him just say that and then go off and try to find this massive hammer to help channel this energy, right? Which I understand the hammer is like this thing that's very cool for people who are into the Marvel universe and like all of the different weapons that Thor gets to use and whatnot. Personally, I feel like his whole side quest to get the hammer is a complete waste of time and really does next to nothing for the whole film because they spend a lot of time on him getting this hammer that he ends up wielding, and would be interesting if it actually was effective at defeating Thanos, but at the end of the day, it does nothing, just like everyone else's goals. And so, in regards to everyone else who is dealing with very real sacrifices, right? Tony Stark, Peter Quill, Gamora, even Thanos, right? They are dealing with the very idea of this thing that they want to hold on to and care for desperately is going to be lost if they don't stop Thanos, or if they achieve their goals for Thanos' case, right? They are all dealing with very tangible emotional stakes involved. And in regards to Thor, when he's off getting this hammer, he's like, I have to get this hammer. Let me grab these two metal contraptions and open this door so that this energy can pour through. And so it felt like a pseudo-epic scene, if you will, where he's just like, oh, I might die. Oh, no, I might die. Oh, wait, I lived. And look, I have this awesome hammer now. Check this out. It's so cool. Let's go kill Thanos now, right? So I didn't really buy the emotional stakes they had surrounding Thor, and I just think that's par for the course for how they've developed Thor up to this point. So interesting, especially from like a nerd standpoint, sure. Compelling from a storytelling perspective, I don't think so. So those are my thoughts. The other characters I think are more ancillary. I didn't really put them as primary characters, but I want to see some dialogue here. So feel free to push back, Andrew.
I don't know that I would boil down Thor's motivations to simply revenge. I think a lot of it is responsibility as well that he feels. Again, and maybe this is the time to talk about the idea behind Infinity War relying on other movies to make it successful. Because if you buy the argument, like let's set that argument aside for a second. You buy the argument that you do take all the other movies and films to lead up to Infinity War, I think Thor definitely is a more compelling character because you have this idea of responsibility that's been building up for the past three movies. The first movie, he wants the throne, he wants power, he's just lustful for this idea of control. He learns that he shouldn't. And what does he want by the end of the movie? He no longer wants that power. The second movie is this idea of Thor shunning that power and trying to run from it. And by the end of the movie, he realizes he doesn't want to be king. The third movie is him returning to Asgard and realizing he has to accept this responsibility. This is what he's meant to do. And so this movie opens up with him finally accepting that responsibility, and it being the people that he is sworn to protect being stripped away from him by Thanos. And so in his mind, it isn't just about revenge. It's about almost avenging the people that were killed by Thanos in order to honor their memory. And you have this conversation where he talks to Rocket in the ship about how all of this stuff was taken from him. He's fought all these people over thousands of years, and his mission now is to kill Thanos. And even if you do just take it as revenge, I still think it makes Thor a compelling character, because it takes everything he would have fought for, and now he has nothing left to lose. There was a movie we reviewed. What one was it? It was the same character, similar type of character, where he had Zod. General Zod is the same type of arc where he has these people he's fighting for. The minute you take those people away, he has nothing left to lose, and he has one sole goal in mind: kill the person that took that from him. It still makes him compelling, even if it doesn't make him compelling in the honorable sense of in the sense of the word honorable, I guess.
Sure, I see where you're going with it, right? And that goes back to, I think that it could be compelling. Once again, this goes back to the broader spectrum of how much was that actually developed in this film. I personally feel like it's reading between the lines a little more than what the film gives it justice for in this film, in that you just don't get as much dialogue on what Thor's actually thinking, other than everything's been stripped from me, I want to kill him. And then he goes off and does these things, and they have tons and tons of action scenes, right, where people are fighting it out and duking it out, right? And that, at the end of the day, becomes his, like, really the thrust of this film, because there are so many fight scenes, like probably a dozen fight scenes between different characters and disparate scenes, all trying to stop Thanos, which, while that's cool, it doesn't necessarily mean that those characters are individually getting development within those scenes. And I think that that's key, because these conflicts, when you have these physical conflicts, are a manifestation of an inward struggle, right? Where they are having to deal with something internally that is now being thrust into the limelight as they come to face with that reality against another opposing force, right? So in this case, they have so much of that some of the ideas of what everyone is fighting for gets lost in the sauce. And that's very much the case, because you see that with not just Thor, not just with Tony Stark, but you also see that with every other single character in this film. And so they don't have the time, even in a 3-hour movie, to give them the justice they deserve to have that development. So I do still think that it's a revenge story for Thor, and I think that everything you said actually affirms the idea that it's a revenge story for Thor, but I don't know that it's necessarily developed in a way that we as audiences see that and necessarily relate to him specifically, especially because even if he was developed more, so much time is distracted by other people's ideas and motivations that it's not necessarily like a focus in this film.
I do want to say, I wasn't saying it's not a revenge story. My point was there's more nuance than just saying it's revenge.
Sure, but yeah, I mean, I understand. I think I see what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
but I don't see the nuance there as terminating in anything, but it is just a revenge story. I don't think it splits the hairs enough to make a justification for that.
Okay.
But anyways, that we could talk more about that as the story progresses. One thing I wanted to throw at you guys as a thought process is all of these characters are coalesced around fighting this singular villain, right? We're talking about, in the previous film, it was Ultron, and everyone is coming to terms with their own internal struggles and relating that to Ultron and his goals. In this case, everyone is literally trying to stop this character Thanos from killing everyone. And so all of the fight scenes, all of their motivations, everything internally and externally is pushing them against this character. Sometimes we see a film where the primary character in the film is not necessarily the heroes, but is actually the villain that we are focusing on. You see this in movies such as, or series such as Death Note, where you see that the primary character is actually the villain, and you're watching him consistently throughout the story, seeing where he goes and whether or not he gets caught or stopped in his villainous plans. what are your thoughts on the idea, I guess, that perhaps the primary character is not the heroes, but it's actually Thanos himself? Go ahead, Andrew.
I think it's hilarious you brought that up because I have that written down. I mean, I think it works if that's the theory you're going for. I mean, it's similar to like how never mind. I'm not gonna bring that up because there's spoilers in there, and this is not a review on Attack on Titan. But you get my point. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. Yeah, I think you can have the main character be the antagonist.
Do you think that's the case in this film?
I don't know. I think there's a solid case to be made for either side because I think that this film you still get a decent amount, even if there is a less amount of screen time for Iron Man. I still think he makes a pretty compelling main character in this film. So I mean, in my mind, it's just awesome villain, awesome hero development, and so you could go either way. I mean, like if you look at the Star Wars movies, right? George Lucas's original intention was Darth Vader was the main character of the story. Now, it didn't terminate that way just because he had to split it into 3 films. And so we end up looking at Luke like the main character. In Lucas's mind, though, Vader was meant to be the central focus of those movies, and it was meant to tell a cohesive story overall about Darth Vader while telling the story of Princess Leia and Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. So I think you can have either. I think you can have both if they're developed well enough.
Nice. Alvin, what are your thoughts?
I don't disagree with the concept about having the villain be the main character because I do agree. I do think it works, as you said, Death Note, it's done fantastically. There's other series and movies I could point to as well that do the same thing. I'm not sure I agree that it works the same way in Infinity War. And the only reason I say that is because even in the case of Death Note that you mentioned, like, sure, we're given the villain's goal, his motive, we're given all this stuff, but also kind of given us enough empathy for him to kind of see if he succeeds or not. Like, we're almost like we want, like, there's just enough empathetic connection to the villain that, like, it kind of blurs the lines a little bit of hero and villain. And, like, but he's still clearly the villain because he's doing some evil things, but also kind of like, we also don't completely disagree with him because he's killing criminals in prison through the Death Note. So, I mean, like, because of, like, that's what my thought process with using the villain as the main character, like, so you kind of blur the lines a little bit, but he's also still clearly the villain. In the case of Thanos, he is clearly the villain, and I think we're given reason to try to empathize with him, but those lines are not clearly drawn out. The most we're shown is, like, a few scenes, like a scene or so from Gamora when she was a child, and Thanos interacting with her, like, kind of showing that they have some relationship before this. But even then, it's just one scene, and there's some conversations, but then things happen in the midst of those conversations I feel undermine their relationship and undermine the empathetic tension we're supposed to be having with these characters, so that when he has to make that sacrifice in Volnir, or whatever the Soul Stone planet's called, you don't get the impression that it's really all that. I mean, he's crying, and like acting like it's a big deal, but it's also like, I don't know, it was really all that big a deal. Like, I was not convinced by that scene that this was a big deal for him as a character. And so, I mean, as a villain, it works great because it establishes him as the villain. But in terms of creating empathetic connection with him, it doesn't work at all.
Sure. Well,
so it just is like, so, like, I see, so just overall, just to finalize my point, I think the idea works in some cases. I don't think it works in Infinity War. Personally, I just don't think it does.
Got it. Yeah, and in regards to going back to the Death Note example that we give, I don't necessarily see it the way that you do, and maybe the idea that I think is he could still, even though you see some good things that he's doing and some bad things, overall, I still think that he is mostly seen as a villain. In many ways, you still want the character, the main character in Death Note, to lose. But the one of the interesting dynamics of that is he is intrinsically tied to some very positive, good characters in the film or in the series. And in this example of Death Note, it's his dad, right? Who is the cop who's trying to catch him. And so it's just inherently interesting to see this villainous character being tied by blood to the person who's trying to catch him and trying to outmaneuver him at the same time. There's this genius mastermind trying to catch him as well. So, I think that some of those other things play into it more and should be accounted for in that example. In the example of Thanos, I think that the idea for him being this intriguing character is, one, if you want to go off the screen time thing, Thanos clearly gets a lot more screen time than most of the other characters in this film, right? So if you want to make the case that he is just by screen time, he probably wins out on that regard. In regards to the idea that he has like motivating factors for being there, I think the lines that he gives a lot of point to that. Sure, you can say maybe his idea with Gamora is a little unbelievable because Gamora hates him, right? It's like, she doesn't like her dad. Why the heck does he have this relation with her? But it's more of like a traumatic bonding type experience, which is a little more complex that they're going for in this case. And you get hints of him in this struggle and how he's tried to achieve this goal in the past. And you see that when he's at the moment of decision and he realizes he has to sacrifice his daughter. And he says, I ignored my destiny once. I cannot do that again, even for you, right? And when he says that line, you see that he has this history where he was having to make a decision to try to achieve these goals that he sees as the most important thing in his life. And he rejected that because he thought there were more important values in his life. And he realized that's what he sacrificed by trying to hold to the people he cared for. And in his mind, he says this highest goal of leading to a world of peace in his mind by obliterating half the universe can only be achieved if he's willing to sacrifice the thing he cares about most, which once again goes back to the broader themes he speaks about at the beginning, where even he has to make the sacrifice of, is he willing to sacrifice the things he cares about most to achieve this goal, and can he succeed in that? Which in some ways even goes to the next film, as you see that doesn't get progressed for him. Spoiler alert, he loses in the next film, but that's a story for next time. For this time, I think that it does establish that well enough that you can make the case. That being said, I'm not fully convinced either. I think it's an interesting thought process, and I think that all of these elements make a pretty interesting case for the idea that maybe Thanos is the primary character of this film. And there's enough developed of him that's unique, and he's the newest, most interesting character in the story as a whole, that there is a strong case for it. But I'm not fully convinced. So, Avalon, I know you have some thoughts. Go ahead and push back.
So, I don't disagree with him being the main character, because he does have the most screen time of all the characters in this movie. I just don't think he makes an effective main character to follow, is what I was getting at. And to answer what you were just saying, I would just say show, don't tell, because it's one thing for him to tell us all of this, which he does in the movie, than for us to be shown these things. Like, we should have shown him failing before. We should have seen this in a prologue scene or an early scene or a flashback or something. So give us an idea of this emotional state that he's in, of his motive and why he's doing this. We need more insight into his psyche, into his emotions in these areas. We don't need to be told these things. We should be shown them so we as an audience can better understand why, and so we can better empathize or understand where he's going, why this conflict is going the way it is. So
sure, and I think that might be the point where if they had added just one scene like that, right, that they could have fully convinced me that he is the main character, that he is the drive. I mean, he is the driving force for this film, but is he the one we want to focus on wholeheartedly in this film? I don't know. And if they put that there, probably. But as of now, it's up in the air. So I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt there.
I mean, I would have rather they show that than the scenes with Thor and Rocket in the forge.
Facts.
So, just
Andrew, do
saying.
you have any more thoughts?
So I'm curious. You guys talk about this scene you want to see with Thanos. What are you envisioning when you think of this suggested scene?
Well, it's so
Because
when
he
you see this
talks about his
idea of,
backstory.
well,
And, like, he
and
mentions
this is where it's like, yeah, if you want to tie more emotional weight to what he's saying, of where he's like, I ignored my destiny once, and I cannot do that again, even for you, showing us how this was such a big deal and struggle for him in the past, where he didn't achieve this goal that he could have achieved at this one point. That's all. Um, Once again, this is a 3 hour long film, right? A lot goes on. And so to focus myopically on the singular character of the villain and say he's the primary character could have made the film better. We don't really know. And it would have definitely come at the detriment of the other characters' development in the story, the other heroes in the Avengers group. So, take that or leave that, because I don't know that that's necessarily something they were fully committed to in making this film. That's not what we see. And so that's not what you get. But it would have been interesting to see that played out. And I think that if they had, they actually might have made this an even better film. We will never know. But that's
Sure.
where I'm willing to leave it.
I mean, at that point, I would just say, right, I think the idea of Thanos being the main character is an interesting thought experiment. I think there is an argument to be made. At the end of the day, I think I would still default to Iron Man being the main character. Like, when you pose it, it's like, I think there are people who could legitimately say they think Thanos is the main character and make a defense for that. I would probably fall in the camp that it's Iron Man by a small margin. And I do think he makes a more compelling character in this film. I do think this is going to keep coming up regardless of what part of the podcast we're in. So I figure we might as well get out of the way now. You guys are both operating under the assumption that in order for a film to be good, it requires it to be self-contained within the medium that it is being told. And it's assumption that I completely reject for multiple reasons. I think, one, there are so many other stories that are told in the same medium that we would look at and call them good films, as far as I know, for both of you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong as I go down the list, that function based off of information we're given in previous films and arcs that were given in previous films. The two that come to mind, or three rather, that come to mind the most is Lord of the Rings, any sort of like Greek mythology, and then thirdly, the Star Wars, especially the original trilogy. You have arcs and you have characters and you have stories that are told, and the third movie, based on your assumption you're making with Infinity War, would fall flat on its face because it requires those elements that are told external to the story itself that's told with, say, Return of the Jedi or Return of the King. So I just want to get that out there, and I want to see what you guys have to say, because I have a lot more to say, but I don't want to just end up rambling.
So I'll start with this because I actually have a slight explanation. So in the case of just the Avengers movies right now, and I probably should have explained this a little bit better to begin with. For the most part, I am going movie by movie until we get to Endgame. And at Endgame, I will then do a summary look at all four movies if any story arcs or characters that precede all four movies, because there are some. But I didn't want to do that until we get to Endgame, because that would be an overarching analysis of all four movies. Because there are some story arcs that do go across all four, I will acknowledge that. But there are also elements and stories that are self-contained within each movie themselves. Like, I do not think as a whole Age of Ultron is like connected and necessarily part of a grander story arc. It's just an event that takes place in the lives of the Avengers between Avengers 1 and Avengers Infinity War that they have to deal with. So there are definitely character arcs and struggles that take place in it that carry over into Infinity War. And you could talk about those story arcs, but I do not think that as a whole, there is an overarching, like, major storyline in terms of the Avengers movies. There are story arcs that are self-contained in each installment, but there are character arcs that overarch all four of them. Now, and even in the case of, since you bring it up, Star Wars, I would say the same thing about Star Wars. There are character arcs that cover several stories, but there aren't necessarily like, I don't know if like all the movies have like an overarching story between the episodes, except maybe the original, the prequel trilogy. Well, and even then, I wasn't even on those podcasts, so I haven't actually done an in-depth look at Star Wars. So, so like, I'm not having to think about this on the fly. So,
that's fine.
But in terms of Lord of the Rings, I would also argue that Lord of the Rings is a book series that has an overarching story to begin with. So even before they made the movies, they knew where their story was going, and I mean, there's a source material that everyone knew they were pulling from. So we all knew there was a beginning, middle, and end. In the case of the Marvel Universe, there isn't really a clear defined end. And we don't know where they're going with it.
So my issue with this movie is not necessarily that they don't have continuing plot lines, right? We've talked about that with both directly relevant stories that are, for example, a continuation of plots, which you brought up for like Lord of the Rings, or you have other ones where they have same characters which have continuing ideas that are developed, but they are new self-contained stories. You talk about like the Dark Knight series, for example, right? Batman has continued development within those, even though each story is self-contained. Whether or not those characters develop continuously throughout those is not the problem. My problem I see with it is that I fundamentally think that they see these previous stories and rely so heavily on the cachet that they've developed in them previously that they assume that the byproduct will be that these characters have character development and the analysis that is developed within this film that simply is not there. And so the idea that we say, oh, Thor is a compelling character or not, is not so much that he has these previous films that he is or is not developed in. It's that in this film, he is not inherently compelling because he doesn't have strong new development as a character. Same thing for the other characters like Hulk, for Vision, for Wanda, for these other characters that are in this film. They are there, they are present, and they have some development, but there's next to none overall because they're being pulled in so many different directions in this film. Because you're not dealing with just, for example, Frodo and Aragorn and a few other smaller characters which aren't as developed as well because they focus on a key competency and making sure those characters are continuously developed throughout these, even in these 3 hour long movies, right? In the case of this, you're trying to take like 6 characters and give them each compelling development as they are almost the own protagonist of this film and making them compelling in this film. So sure, they have these backstories. We will acknowledge those. We say that those are valuable for their stories and they have cachet for us understanding who they are in this film. But are they developed any differently because of that? I would argue that's not the case.
So
And that being said, I gave it a 6.9. I still think this film's great.
Let me just clarify before I continue. So your complaint, as I understand it, is not that they rely upon other movies. It's that they don't develop the characters within this individual movie.
Sure, if you want to look at it like that, yeah, I would say that there was almost a laziness to the writing, if you will, these ones, because they expect you to carry that cachet into this rather than taking it and running with it further.
Okay. Let me ask you a question.
It goes back to my complaint at the beginning where I said they expect you to do the homework and watch all the movies beforehand.
Sure. I would make the
like
argument if you haven't seen the movies leading up to Infinity War, you shouldn't be watching Infinity War. Let me ask you a question. Do you think the final 2 episodes of Attack on Titan function within their own right? If you were to just watch those last 2 episodes, do you think the characters go through a transformative experience in the sense that they begin and end in different ways, or that they rely far too heavily on the multiple seasons that led up to it?
They absolutely rely on those. But the point is that in those final episodes, they are also developing them further in those episodes.
Sure. So that's where my second point comes in. I would argue that the characters in this film that are highlighted are further developed in this film. You may not see the conclusion of that development in the overarching grand scheme of things. You see the conclusion of that arc in Endgame, because this is a 2-part Avengers movie. It was advertised as such. It is executed as such. You get characters. Oh, go ahead.
It was initially advertised as such, then they pulled that advertising and renamed it Infinity War and Endgame.
Sure, I mean they can rename it as such. It still is.
Yeah, but people today don't know that. They're gonna see Infinity War and Endgame and not realize it's part 1 and part 2.
I mean, if you don't know that, then that's simply because you haven't seen. You're not familiar with the Marvel universe at that point. So
I would argue, because we've had Avengers Age of Ultron, and then Infinity War, most average moviegoers today who aren't familiar with the comics, they're not going to know that Infinity War is a part 1, just by the title of it being Infinity War.
So, but at that point, your claim, which, by the way, Marvel at this point is a household name. It is reaching the point of popularity that Star Wars had in the 1970s. It is something that everyone knows exists, and they know it exists because of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, but at that point, you're arguing not on basis of story, you're arguing based on marketing and based on cultural relevance and based on other factors outside of the storytelling.
At this point, you're arguing based off the name of the movie, not the movies themselves. You're saying it was named Part 1, Part 2, but now it's named Infinity
you're
War
expecting, based on the argument you said, you are saying that this is Part 1, and audiences will inherently know this is Part 1 because by going into this movie and by the end of it. And actually, I would argue by the end of this movie, the way this movie ends, it doesn't end on a cliffhanger. It doesn't end like there's going to be another story after this. It actually ends in a way that it could conceivably end at that point.
I mean,
so
in a vacuum, yes. In the Marvel universe, I would say absolutely not, because they've set the precedent that they bring characters back. So I think if you've watched the movies up to this, you're probably expecting them to come back in the next movie.
Dang it.
I, as someone who had not even seen all of the MCU up until this point, I had seen like a large portion of the movies. I had no doubt that they were bringing all those characters back, save for like Gamora in this film. Gamora and Vision were the only two where I was like, okay, they're probably dead. Even Loki in this film, I had my doubts about. But that's because it's the boy who cried wolf with every Thor film that's led up to this one. That said, I think we operate underneath the assumption that a film needs to be self-contained because you go and you watch it from beginning to end, and therefore it must be one cohesive story. I think yes and no. I think yes, the movie should be compelling because it's right. You're getting one movie, and there needs to be a reason to go and watch it and be invested in the movie. But I think we holding it to the same standard that we do with, say, movies like Inception or Interstellar or Gladiator or Braveheart, the list goes on, is flawed at its core because of the fact that these movies are made as a series. It's like saying you should be able to watch Star Wars Episode 6 on its own and not rely on these previous iterations, right? Star Wars Episode 6, you get Luke Skywalker at the very beginning, a trained Jedi. You don't get any explanation of him being a farm boy and his motivations and joining the rebellion. You don't get any of the backstory with Princess Leia or Han Solo, or how Han Solo even got frozen in carbonite to begin with. All of these things, it heavily relies upon going right into the beginning of the movie to even start it off. And I would argue that doesn't go to the detriment of the film. It makes it better because we're able to get right into the action, right into the development, right into these character stories, picking up where we left off and telling a better story because we have more screen time overall. It's why TV shows can be so excellent, because we have more time to develop these arcs and these characters. And just because it's a movie I don't think just because it's a movie, we should just dismiss all of the previous films that have come before it, because we think it ought to stand on its own 2 feet, in the sense that we should ignore everything prior and focus just on what's contained in the movie itself.
Everything you said, I completely agree with. I don't think that anything you said is incorrect. And I also think that everything you said does not disprove what I have stated, which is that
Sure.
I think that the development of these characters in this film overall is inherently weak. And that there is no strong development for these characters, for who they are and who they become in this film.
Sure, which is the second point I'm going to get to. I said a lot, so I want to give you guys time to respond if you had anything to say.
I mean, I don't disagree on some of what you said, and I actually do agree that. I mean, in terms of storytelling and story setting, I mean, especially like you brought up Star Wars, I agree a little bit with that. Like, characters progress and they can get to new stage, but I also echo Maverick's point. Some of the characters just aren't very well developed in this movie. Um, and the other thing I just want to bring up, and this is kind of getting to semantics of like filmmaking and storytelling. If I wanted to see something of that. I mean, there's a difference between how a TV series is told versus how a movie is told. A movie, there's almost an expectation of more of a self-contained story arc or story in some ways. And when it doesn't complete a story arc by the end, it's less satisfying, I find. Whereas with a series, because it's inherently character based, you don't necessarily have to have a complete like story arc by the end of an episode per se. You just need like the characters to keep developing, to keep moving forward in a certain degree. So I think there's an inherent difference between a series like Attack on Titan and the MCU because what we're expecting is different in each case.
I think it's harder, right? I don't
So,
know
but we're
that
dealing
like
with, but at that point, we're dealing with semantics of filmmaking and storytelling.
yeah, I
So, and
think
what you're
that
expecting. So,
to Andrew's point, I don't think that it's impossible to make the overarching arcs that he's saying exist, and we have clear evidence that they do. But it is just an additional barrier compared to what you're doing with like a TV show. But that doesn't necessarily, yeah, disprove the point for sure. But go on to your second point.
Sure. So the second point is talking about characters and how they transform in this film. And I'll go through a couple of them because I think even though some of them are side characters, they're still compelling in the sense that they do have a level of transformation. I think that Thor in this film starts off arguably before the film even begins with his fight against Thanos, and we pick up right after that major life-changing event for him, which is another thing. The film with these, right, I don't think Thor is the primary character. I think Thor is a side character who pushes the boundaries of being primary. The way that the film is told is different in the sense that it doesn't have loss for these characters happening at like this tumultuous point in the film. It happens for different characters at different times. For Thor, the loss that he experiences that transforms his characters happens at the beginning of this film. With the loss of his brother, with the loss of Heimdall, which sets him on this path of vengeance. It's this idea of embodying responsibility, taking it on, having this path of revenge because of this loss he suffered. He doesn't collapse due to this tragedy. He goes on to avenge the people that he lost by taking on Thanos. With Iron Man, you go from this paranoid individual that he is, terrified of Thanos, to fully confronting him. And by the end of the film, he loses everything, which is why I think his character still progresses by the end. Because at the end of this film, Tony Stark is completely defeated. We haven't seen the full termination of his transformation, but he is defeated in the sense that he sees no point in fighting Thanos. I do remember talking about this to someone else previously, and how the opening scene of Endgame would probably make a better end scene for Infinity War, because it is truly the conclusion of some of these characters' arcs in Infinity War. I think it's interesting, and I'm not sure where I'd go with that, but I do think that the opening scene of Endgame does function as the termination of Iron Man's transformation in this film, because you get that line where he's like, "We lost. There's no point. I'm done." And he gives up in that film, in that scene. Doctor Strange, I think, has a pretty compelling transformation. He opens this film being completely not self-absorbed, but he's mission-oriented. He's only concerned with the Time Stone, and protecting it and fulfilling his duty. By the end, he goes to this self-sacrificing guardian protecting Iron Man. Now, quick side tangent. I think the idea that the Time Stone shows him the one reality where everything works out and thus is the ends all, says all for this entire movie is absolutely retarded, and I hate it. But that aside, I think that his character still does go through a visible transformation in this film to actually caring about Iron Man and the other heroes around him. So, I mean, the list, I have a list of different characters, but I want to give again the chance to push back on these.
Go ahead.
In regards to Stephen Strange, I'm not sure it's a character change so much as he saw the one reality where they won and realized for them to win, Tony Stark had to live. He only gave the time stone up because he knew that was the only way to keep Tony Stark alive, just to make sure that happened, where Tony Stark would eventually save them in the end game. So it wasn't necessarily like because he cared about people, it's because he logically realized that was what he needed to do in the moment.
Sure. I mean, I think Doctor Strange is one. Honestly, I was just gonna punt until the next movie because, to be honest, I don't think it's a full analysis of his until you get to that final analysis, and that's just gonna go into the whole time travel thing that we're gonna have to deal with in the next episode. So that's a whole nother bag of worms that I just really didn't think was worth having the side tangent of in this episode. But like, you can maybe make the case for it is right. I'm not gonna deny or affirm that in this episode. In regards to the other ones, frankly, you are giving like these grandiose explanations of transformation that, frankly, I think are based off of one, maybe two lines of dialogue that they're given in this entire film. And so, sure, it can sound nice on paper, but if you actually watch the film, you're basing it off of a threadbare piece of evidence.
Sure.
The strongest case you have is for Iron Man. And like, sure, that's where for all in regards to like giving points to who's the primary protagonist. Are they compelling? All of that stuff, right? All of that, when you put it into Tony Stark, got points from me. Like full on, sure, I will dump those in there all day long because I think that they definitely try with him compared to the other characters. But there's just so much screen time to everyone else that it does in some ways get lost in the sauce. And so I don't think that it's as compelling as it ought to be.
Sure. And I think honestly, if that is the position you're taking, I think it's valid. I think where I disagree, and I think this is the final part of my argument when it comes to the movies, you're relying on them as a precursor to this one, is highlighted in the example I gave earlier of Attack on Titan. I would argue characters in Attack on Titan do not fundamentally change in, say, that final 2-part episode that's like 2 hours long. It's essentially the equivalent of watching a full movie. You have events happen and massive battles happen, similar to how Infinity War occurs, and that, at the end of the day, to be quite frank, is how I view Infinity War. It is the culmination of these characters' arcs. It is a moment in time in which we get to see all of these stories come together and brought into one. And so you inherently have to watch everything else and include it as a part of that analysis.
No. I would agree that you have to keep the other things in mind. And
Well, no,
we
my
get
point
to
is
the
not
emotional stakes of Attack on Titan, but like
sure.
I would argue that there's more merit to those and how they're played out. But that's for a completely different podcast, probably.
I would never say Infinity War is better than Attack on Titan either. So,
your favorite.
Hear me, subjects of Ymir. My name is Aaron Yeager. I think my point is right. Earlier on, I asked you. I clarified. Is your qualm, and because you agreed that it relies on other films, your qualm was that there's no transformation in this film alone. My point was, in a TV show, you don't see transformation like you're expecting in, say, a film over the course of 2 or 3 episodes. You might, but it's not going to happen every 2 or 3 episodes. And so I see Infinity War as an episode in the grand TV show that is the Marvel Cinematic Universe that doesn't necessarily require every single character to have mass transformation, but they can still be compelling because they have events and motivations that are driving them in this film and carry them into the next.
Well, I'd also like to point out, in the case of like a series, like not every episode is going to be good either. And the reality is that Infinity War, I would argue, is perhaps the weakest movie in terms of the Avengers like lineup of movies. And after watching it now, I'd say it's the weakest. And that it's just not as compelling as some of the story arcs we saw in Avengers and Age of Ultron.
We already reviewed Avengers and Age of Ultron, and we'll get to Endgame, but no spoilers. But I'm not a fan of Endgame, so we can just skip over that one. We don't need to get into the time travel mess. Let's just do Back to the Future Part 2. Let's revisit Marty McFly.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
That's crazy. It's crazy we haven't actually finished that series. That's interesting.
Yeah.
True.
No,
I mean, they reference it in Endgame, so we might as well just turn the Endgame podcast into Back to the Future. So, because they trashed my boy Doc Brown, so screw them.
It's hilarious.
Anyways, I think I wanted to get. We spent a lot of time on
traumatizing time travel movie on a review as well.
No. I just we spent a lot of time on this. I think we've hashed over it enough. The reason I want to bring it up is because it inherently informs the rating I give this movie and why it's so drastically different than, say, Avalon's, and even to an extent it's different than yours, right? You gave it what, a 6.4?
6.9.
Okay, a 6.9. At that point, you're giving it a 7. I've given it an 8.5. That's over 2.5 points more, which is quite a bit when you're up in the 6.9, 7, 8 rate region. Which, to be honest, I surprised myself with this rating because it's the same rating I gave Revenge of the Sith, which I was like, wow, that's insane. I think they're just fundamentally different films in the sense that they serve different purposes in the greater overarching story that they are telling within their own universe. So Interstellar got the same rating for me, but again, Interstellar is meant to be self-contained because it's a singular film that has a beginning and end, and that's all we get. With the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the beginning is arguably Iron Man. The end, I consider it to be Endgame. So once we get past that, my argument is not going to function. So it's kind of like Game of Thrones. Once we get past season 6, it doesn't really exist. I don't remember any other seasons.
It's funny. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've hashed through a lot of the characters in this. We've hashed through the villain. We've gone through a lot of the themes and like what it even means to be a compelling story, right, across several films. So I think we've given a lot of thought to it, honestly. You've probably heard each of our stances pretty thoroughly at this point. So if you, as the audience, are convinced one way or another, feel free to, go and give that person a hug. But at this point, we're going to probably let those lie as they are.
Please don't.
Let's talk about the lasting impact of this film. Obviously, they made a second one, which is the sequel to this one directly, and it is the 4th installment, Endgame,
Well, they
which
made
we
it
have
the same
referenced
time as
many
this one.
times. Huh?
They made Endgame at the same time as Infinity War.
Yeah,
They came out a year
exactly.
apart, so
Yeah.
I mean,
So what are your thoughts on the lasting impact of this film? I mean, regardless, they made a second one, but even within that, does this one individually make a lasting impact? Clearly, Andrew, you like it more than the next one, so it had an impact on you. What are your thoughts on that?
I do want to say briefly before we get into this, because we kind of skipped over the idea of like worsening, increased tensions, loss, revelations in the film. I do end up giving this film quite a few points in those areas, and we can brush over these quickly because I think a lot of it's covered within the conversation we already had. But like putting heroes in situations from getting progressively worse, right? You've got the Guardians almost capturing Thanos. Star-Lord freaks out, ruins that for them. You have Thor getting his weapon only to fail and not using it quickly enough. You have Tony giving everything he has in this final fight and still losing. In terms of loss, right? You have Tony completely left stranded in space with nobody but Nebula left, watching the person that he looks at as his responsibility dissolving in his arms and like begging him to help him and not being able to do anything about it, when Iron Man's whole character is figuring out how to solve a problem using his mind, and yet he cannot for the life of him solve this problem in Infinity War. You have Captain America being able to do nothing other than just sit there and go, oh God, when he's watching Bucky and Sam Wilson and Black Panther all just dissolve in front of him. In terms of revelations, I don't know that they're like Attack on Titan level revelations, but like you have the Soul Stone requiring that you have to lose a loved one in order to gain it. So a soul for a soul. You have the surprise ending, right? The snap at the end. Comic readers probably expected this. I don't think the average moviegoer expected Thanos to just win at the last second and snap half of people out of existence. So I give it quite a few points there. Obviously, transformation we talked about, which does lead me to the closure and the impact this film had, which I can get to. I just wanted to drop that stuff there because we didn't really specifically address it.
No, I mean, I actually gave them a lot of points on those areas as well. So I was most of the things that led to loss for me in point value was early on in my rating. So
Sure.
this stuff actually was definitely more in line with me. I even think that the revelation could be bumped a bit on my side based off of that because I wasn't thinking exactly of the Soul Stone in that way. But yeah, I mean, I still gave it points in that area. I thought scene is inherently intriguing just in how Thanos has to struggle with his issue with Gamora. So I have no problem with a lot of what you just said, and I agree a lot.
And I think
honestly,
it's also
it's like a 7 versus an 8.5. Those tally up make sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also the first time we actually get to see Thanos truly having a human side to him. Because up until this point, he just kind of has the god complex, and even though he knows that, like, I'm sure he's aware his children are dying. Like, there's no emotional weight in it for him. It's when he finally has to get rid of Gamora that we realize he does have some sort of emotions, and he does have cares for people. But not only that, Gamora, as we understand it, is probably the only person he actually cares for in this universe. So it adds, in my mind, it doubles the emotional stakes for him in this scene.
I struggled to say world-shattering loss because, again, I didn't know who the protagonist was, so I gave it low points because, I mean, it really depends on who you said what the protagonist was. So, I mean, I wasn't convinced any particular person was the major character. There are certainly characters who suffer loss in this movie. I'm not sure that I think some are more convincing than others. I mean, in regards to the whole scene with Thanos and Gamora, I mean, I just think, I mean, personally, I just would have liked to have seen more scenes, like flashbacks or something between Gamora and Thanos then. I would have liked to have seen their relationship developed a little bit more before that scene. Even if they did have a rough relationship, just establishing more of who they were before that scene happens. Considering like how long this movie is and the screen time, how little screen time certain characters have, I just wish there was more of that between focus on Gamora and Thanos then. Just because then it would have added more weight to that loss and to that moment. So I don't think it's bad. I just don't think it's great either. I just would have liked to have seen more development to given more reasons to feel something in that moment. So I mean, not that you don't feel anything for Gamora's death, but I just felt like I wasn't convinced about Thanos's relationship with Gamora because I wasn't given. I just felt like I was given enough about their relationship to begin with. So all I know is that he adopted her and wasn't very nice to her in raising her. Like turned her into a weapon of war, pretty much. So that she hates him, pretty much. That's. I do admit I didn't though. And as far as the surprise ending, this movie does something which I like. I've come to realize last few years. It's something I absolutely hate in stories. It just irks me whenever I see it, and when I begin to realize this movie has it. It just started to tear me up inside. I was like, I just got so annoyed, and that this movie has several climaxes back to back towards the end, and I just got so annoyed. Like, I hate it when a story does this, and it just bothers me just no end. Just like, I'd rather just get to a climactic point and then have that confrontation or whatever, and then the fall off of that, because then we have a clear ending. I just don't like it when like, oh, it's ending, now it's not. Now it's ending, now it's not. Yeah, like it's just like almost like Psych, like 3-4 times in a row, and it's just like, why? Like, why are you putting us through this? I don't see the point. As an audience member or as a storyteller, I just get annoyed.
Yeah, and we
There's
talked
no
about that a little
storytelling
bit.
benefit of it.
Right. And we talked about that a little bit when we reviewed Iron Man 3, because you definitely get that in that film as well. But the only reason I think it works in this film is because they actually lose. And so the escalating stakes actually terminate something terrible happening, versus in those other ones where it is very much a fake out until the very end, where they do end up winning despite all of the faux evil masterminds. So, yeah,
I'll
that's
admit on that
totally.
particular point, that's like more my personal preference and like opinion, but just like definitely like that's just something in stories that annoys me. So
Sure.
I just gave it low points there because of how much it annoys me.
I mean,
Gotcha.
I think at that point, my counter is again Lord of the Rings and Attack on Titan. Like, there are multiple climaxes in both of those films. Attack on Titan, especially, you have multiple climaxes in that final episode. And at that point, they still win, right? So it's not the same ending as Infinity War, even though you may say, like, you lost a lot. I don't know that having multiple climaxes is inherently bad. I think you just
Well, in
need
the
to
case of Attack on Titan, I think even with each of those climaxes, it's progressing the story and conflict a little further. It's not like in the cases, it's not like multiple climaxes in and of itself isn't necessarily bad as long as it progresses the story forward. If it's just resetting everything though, like, oh, psych, like the story's over, but now it's not, kind of thing. That
Okay,
like,
so well, at that case, what climaxes are you referring to? Because if your claim is they don't progress the story, then at that point the question becomes, all right, so what instances in this story are you referring to?
well, first off the top of my head is the issue with the Soul Stone, when she destroys the soul. I mean, not the Soul Stone, the Mind Stone, kills Vision the first time. Then he reverses it, takes it, and then Thor cuts him in the chest with the axe. But then that ends up being a psych out too. Which, by the way, that completely because it doesn't work. It undermines the whole plot with them going to the forge. But Maverick already said that earlier, so
And there's some lesser examples which are a little harder to say, but it's more just like leading up to it. Once again, wasn't an issue for me, but like if you want to make the case for it, the whole issue with the fight between Tony Stark and Thanos and everyone else, and then Doctor Strange could be some iteration of that, especially because fight scene goes on for like 10 minutes. And the other fight scenes around that as well, where they're attacking Wakanda and stuff like that, where it's just very long and drawn out. And the idea that the Hulk takes off that one beast and he fights him only to be to save Wanda, only to see that he doesn't actually succeed in that, et cetera, et cetera. So
Sure, and I mean, I think I agree that these exist, these climaxes. I still don't think it defeats the point that there are other successful franchises out there that do the same, right? Not to spoil Attack on Titan, which I don't intend to, but there are multiple climaxes in the same fight against the same person where they continually have these ups and downs, where there's a singular character that has this climactic fight, and then there's a little drop, and then it's a psych, and it's like, nope, it's not the end. There's another fight after this. And then secondarily, I didn't even know, as a side note, that Maverick, I'd missed that, where Maverick said that he thought the forging of the hammer was undermining Thor's arc. I think it goes so well with this movie because all of the characters are desperately trying to find a way to fight and stop Thanos, and they're all going about it in their own way, right? You have Iron Man going and trying to fight him on his own with Spider-Man. You've got Thor trying to get his hammer. You've got the Guardians confronting him on their own. You've got Captain America and Wakanda, which also ties in to Age of Ultron well, because he tells him, if we die together, which is why Iron Man's so pissed off with Captain America in Endgame, because he's like, that's what you said, and where were you? and it's like all of them are trying to fight Thanos on their own, which, going back to the first Avengers movie, it's about them having to work together in order to stop a common threat. Well, guess what? They don't all work together in this film, and it fails. So,
I mean, that's a hard case to make just because it is a team up fight in multiple of these instances. But like, I feel like
Sure.
we're getting caught in the weeds at this point over minute details that have already been hashed out. So I don't know that it's
Yeah.
worthy to continue the discussion that we're clearly already opinionated on.
Yes.
For these points and the other examples you gave, we could go further into because I think that they are actually invalid, but we can talk about that another time because this isn't an Attack on Titan movie review. This is a freaking Avengers Infinity War review. So we're gonna leave that discussion to lie where it is.
If
Everyone,
you guys take anything from this podcast throughout all the 150 some episodes, at the end of the day, there's one thing. Watch Attack on Titan. That's all you need to know. That's what this podcast is about. This podcast is telling you what a good story is. And you know what the template is? Attack on Titan.
yeah, you have. He always brings that up. I always bring up Lord of the Rings and Red Rising and Avalon. I don't know what you guys always bring up, but yeah, we all have our little bits that we keep hatching up.
I think my 2 bits are probably Star Wars and Attack on Titan at this point.
Yeah, pretty much.
And yours are Lord of the Rings, and I think I bring up Lord of the Rings a decent amount, but that's more over time because I know you will understand the parallels I'm drawing.
It's a good sounding board, sure, for the amount that I bring it up. Yeah.
So,
anyways, can we get to the last thing impact now?
yes.
So,
now
I just want to bring up one thing because it annoyed me so much as well, and that's the setting. Is the setting believable? Because something occurred to me watching this movie. I'm like, wait, hang on a second. This is an alien invasion. Why are we not being shown the governments coming together to deal with this threat? Why are we only shown the Avengers and Wakanda? That immediately pulled me out of the movie because I felt like if this is a worldwide threat of aliens coming to Earth, like in this manner, I feel like the Earth wouldn't just be relying on the superhero like Avengers team, especially when half of them are like breaking the Sokovia Accords or whatever. So it's like I just felt like there was something lacking there. Also, aren't ICBM's missiles a thing? Like why does Wakanda not have them? Why are they not launching things at the space aliens as they're coming into orbit? Like there's several like things in that whole sequence that just absolutely pulled me out of the movie.
Well, I mean, I think Thaddeus Ross was supposed to be the little nod to that, where he's like, "You guys are gonna get court-martialed," and then War Machine's like, "Screw you, we're gonna do this," and then it's like, that's that. I mean, if you really want to get into the government's getting involved in this, there's an extra 15 to 20 minutes to the film right there that we just didn't have the screen time for. But I guess.
Well, I mean, also keep in mind we didn't have that in Avengers or Age of Ultron. We didn't see the governments assembling. We had a whole movie dedicated to it, though. It's called Captain America: Civil War, and you can go listen to that.
You were going to bring that up.
I would argue.
They don't have any more firepower. It all got blown up by Captain America.
But go ahead, Avalon.
I would just argue in the case of Avengers, that takes that's over the course of a few hours. The aliens come in, invade New York, and everyone's scrambling. In the course of a few hours, it's over. In the case of Age of Ultron, it also is a case of a few hours, where the Sokovia gets lifted into the sky and they deal with the threat of Ultron. The first alien invasion to New York takes place on one day, so the world is made aware of an alien presence, and then days later, we go to Wakanda and the aliens come back.
Sure.
You would think at that point there would be more communication, and if they have an idea of where the aliens are what they're after, that Wakanda and others would be working together to mobilize the Earth's defenses against an alien threat.
Sure, and I think that's where my second point comes in. Thanos isn't really waging war on Earth like Ultron or Loki was. He is simply there for the stones. In the first event, you have a singular ship that comes and goes. Like, what's the governments of the world going to do with that? It's gone in like less than an hour. keep in mind, this is also the Marvel universe, so catastrophes are happening all the time in all the previous movies. And then with Wakanda, he goes to Wakanda, and the Wakandans probably in their minds are like, we're the most advanced civilization on Earth. What are we going to do? Contact the United States? What are they going to do for us? So, I mean, I think, like, in theory, sure. I think one, right, the movie doesn't have time to deal with it. Two, we have Civil War to deal with it. Three, it's a lot more contained than the previous Avengers movies anyways. So I don't know that it's realistic to expect the governments to get involved, especially considering the fact they have no idea what's going on to begin with. And even if they did, they get snapped out of existence before they have time to react. So I mean, again, Maverick's dying over here because he wants us to get to the lasting impact of this film.
Losing my mind. Alvin, what are your
He's
thoughts
just
on the
gonna hate
lasting
editing
impact of this film?
It's like,
I
what
can't
are
deal
my
with you
thoughts
guys
for the last
anymore.
before we get to, okay, lasting impact of this film. Okay,
Maverick's on his 8th beer right now.
No, I haven't drank a single drop.
It was a joke.
Dang it.
Oh wait, I haven't talked about heightened tension. Hang
No,
on. So
stop. We're done. We're done. You're done. No one else is allowed to talk about anything else. You can talk about what you think about the lasting impact of this film is, and then we're done. We've rehashed everything more than it needs to be.
Okay. I mean, as I said before earlier in the podcast, the lasting impact. I mean, I think this is personally the weakest of the four in terms of the story. I do think it has one of the best villains in the series. I think Thanos is an excellent villain. And I think this movie did do a good job setting up Endgame to be the most financially successful of all four Avengers movies. We won't get into discussions on Endgame yet until next week or whenever we decide to review it. But financially, it was the most successful. And I think part of that was because of Infinity War. Now, I don't know. Like, I think it's gonna be your personal preference, like which movie you like more. I personally like whenever I want to watch an Avengers movie, I think I watch Endgame or the first Avengers movies more than Infinity War. There are some good, cool fight scenes, but some long ones, but I don't honestly know if they really contribute all that much to the overarching story of this movie. They're just cool spectacle, because that's really what this movie is. It's a bunch of spectacle, because it's bringing all these storylines together. We're trying to bring all these storylines together into one cohesive beginning of a finale, which is what it is. So it's a spectacle event, is what it is what I see it as. And it just personally, I just and I think the other thing about this movie is if you take this movie on its own, and I'm not against tragedies. I am not against dark or depressing, or even dark, depressing themes or anything like that. But usually when I go to see a story, I want there to be something good to take out of it, something like that. And I think the problem with Infinity War is if you take it on its own, the theme you pull from it is death is inevitable and you cannot fight it. It's more or less the takeaway you get just from this movie. If you just take it by its ending. Which is kind of a depressing, dark theme and message to pull from a story. And as someone who has struggled with depression heavily at points, I don't need more of that kind of messaging. So, and I don't appreciate it. So that's just where my mind is at. So.
Gotcha. Very fair. Andrew, what are your thoughts on the lasting impact of this film?
Nihilism, yeah, baby.
You can keep your nihilism.
Obviously, I like this film. We've had about an hour and, well, recording restarted, so an hour and 45 minutes to talk about it.
It's probably 2 hours.
Well, last it was 1:39. Anyways,
I thought he start I thought you stopped and
Doesn't
started
matter.
recording once already.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Like-
Now we're just arguing at the podcast. What on earth?
That's what people want to see.
True. So I think this film has a massive impact in the sense that it, in my mind, before seeing Endgame, functions as the conclusion to the MCU as we knew it. And we're going to talk about this a lot in Endgame, and that I don't like the way that Endgame brings everyone back. Because this was, and it doesn't bring everyone back, right? You don't truly get Gamora back, and you don't truly get Vision back. Endgame had a massive impact because it was the culmination of a decade's worth of films that were leading up to it. You have all of these characters you've grown with and grown attached to, and you've seen them develop into the characters they are in Infinity War. And you see where all of these different paths they've taken have led them, and the conclusions they've drawn from the experiences that they have shared previously. And in Endgame, you get all of that, just in a massive explosion of character interactions and the villain of Thanos that, again, also had been building up since the first Avengers movie. Arguably, the ideas of this film had been building up since, like, Captain America and even Iron Man 1, with the inclusion of the Tesseract and the beginning of Iron Man's journey, and then you still have it going on in Infinity War. So, one, I think this film had a massive impact because it showed, like, you can keep a movie series going for a while and still make it successful. Unfortunately, I think Marvel took that message and went, now we can just do whatever the heck we want and it will still be successful. Little did they realize it was successful for a lot more than just we had other movies leading up to it. Oh, there goes my AirPod. So I think this movie is great in the sense that it is the culmination of a decade's worth of work. I think the lasting impact is Infinity War is going to be remembered for a while, arguably, because in the sense that Avengers was the first of its kind in that it brought everyone together. Infinity War is this first of its kind in the end that it put in, it in a sense it closed the page on a decade's worth of movies that had been coming out. So obviously it was successful. It made them millions. Endgame even more so because it took what Infinity War had started and it ran with it. And then after that, we have them waking up drunk in the gutter. So its impact on the normal populace is they loved it and they got to see their favorite characters in this, like, tumultuous event. Its impact on Disney was they're high on money and now they're waking up and realizing, well, shoot, turns out that high wasn't so great once you start losing money like they have been all year. Well, I don't know if it's really losing money, but they have not been making as much by a long shot as they had hoped with their more recent films.
And there you are. That's the state of Marvel, and that's the Marvel Cinematic Universe brought to a head in Avengers Infinity War. So, guess what? We're finally over. We did it. Here we are.
Actually, I have
It's-
one more point.
No, you don't. It's the end. That's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back as we always are.
See you next time.
week. We'll see you all
Bye.
then.
He died. Oh, you're gonna break my computer. Holy crap.